My name is Colin Spears, a sergeant in the United States Army. At 26, I'd been trained to face enemies in the farthest corners of the world. But no one ever trained me for the battlefront at my own family's Christmas dinner table. Amidst the scent of roast turkey and the sound of holiday music, my brother, Ethan, looked at me with contempt and said, "You should be grateful you still have a place to come back to and freeload." The words were a gunshot. My mother quickly spooned more mashed potatoes onto her plate as if she'd heard nothing. My father, Richard, just cleared his throat and looked away. When I replied, "I don't freeload. I've sent money home every month," Ethan stood up, and a dry, sharp crack echoed through the room. His slap sent a ringing through my ears, and then he snarled, "Get out of my house, you useless thing." Pushed out into the freezing snow, barefoot with a burning cheek, I didn't cry. They didn't know they hadn't just thrown out a daughter. They had just declared war on a soldier. If you have ever sacrificed everything only to be treated like you were nothing by your own family, let me know where you're from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this is the story of how a betrayed soldier planned the final mission of her life. The smell should have been the first sign of peace. In our suburban Westerville home, Christmas Eve smelled exactly the way it was supposed to in the heart of Ohio. The deep, savory aroma of a slow-roasted turkey, the sweet and tangy scent of my mother's cranberry sauce simmering on the stove with a hint of cinnamon, and the crisp pine of the Christmas tree in the living room. Softly from a small radio on the kitchen counter, Bing Crosby was dreaming of a white Christmas, everything in its place. The polished silverware gleamed under the warm light of the dining room chandelier, resting beside plates holding a perfect Rockwellian scene of a Midwestern holiday meal. Turkey, green bean casserole with those crunchy fried onions on top, mashed potatoes, gravy. It was a picture of warmth, of family, of home. But pictures lie. I had been home on leave for 3 days, and the piece was as thin as the first layer of ice on a puddle. My brother, Ethan, 3 years my senior and the designated prince of the Spears household, sat opposite me. He worked as a project manager at my father's financial consulting firm, a title that seemed to mostly involve wearing expensive shirts and treating my contributions to the world as a quaint hobby. He started the offensive subtly, a verbal reconnaissance mission. "So, another long vacation, huh, Collins?" he asked, swirling the red wine in his glass. "Must be nice getting paid to just be away." I kept my voice level, a parade rest tone I'd perfected over years. "It's called leave, Ethan. I earned it." Right, your little government stipend," he said with a smirk, taking a deliberate, noisy sip of wine. "I forget that's a real job." My mother, Carol, jumped in with the frantic energy of a diplomat trying to avert an international crisis. "The weather forecast says we might get a real white Christmas this year. Isn't that lovely?" Her voice was bright, brittle, and completely ignored. The attempt to maintain the facade of a happy, normal family was a weak and failing defense. I decided to meet his attack head-on, but with facts, not emotion. That's how we're trained. You don't engage with the enemy's taunts. You present clear, irrefutable intelligence. "It's not a stipend," I said calmly, setting my fork down. "In fact, I've sent home over $10,000 in the last 2 years to help out with the mortgage." The effect was immediate. A fork scraped loudly against a plate. My father, Richard, who had been silently observing the conflict like a detached general, let out a choked cough, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his napkin. Ethan, however, threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a sound of amusement, it was a weapon, loud and derisive, meant to humiliate. 10,000? He scoffed, his face flushed with wine and arrogance. "You think that's some grand gesture? That's your duty. That money doesn't even make a dent in the real world. That's rent, you get it? You're rent for having a room here. You're a tenant, not a benefactor." He had done it. With a single brutal sentence, he had reframed my sacrifice. The money I'd sent, the extra shifts I'd pulled, the small comforts I'd denied myself overseas thinking I was helping my family. It was all just a transaction. A cheap, sordid deal that stripped away every ounce of love and meaning. The shock of it left me speechless for a second. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. I pushed my chair back, the legs groaning against the polished hardwood floor. I stood up, my voice low but steady. You don't have the right to speak to me like that. I never saw the slap coming. One moment, Ethan was across the table. The next, he was on his feet, his arm swinging in a vicious arc. The sound was a sharp, cracking noise that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. A white-hot sting exploded across my left cheek, and my head snapped to the side. The room tilted, the warm Christmas lights blurring into painful streaks of color. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. In the ringing silence that followed, I saw my mother, Carol, make a small, precise movement. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the pristine white tablecloth. A tiny fleck of gravy had splattered near Ethan's plate during his outburst. With a delicate pinch of her napkin, she dabbed it away. A spot on her perfect table was a more pressing emergency than the handprint blooming on her daughter's face. Then, my father finally spoke. His voice was calm, devoid of alarm. He wasn't speaking to me. He looked at my brother, whose chest was still heaving, and said, "That's enough, son. Don't get your hands dirty. Don't get your hands dirty." The words hit me harder than the slap. He wasn't telling his son that violence was wrong. He was telling him that I was the dirt. My very presence, my defense of my own dignity, was a stain. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter. I was an object, a problem to be managed, a piece of filth that had sullied their perfect Christmas. The complicity wasn't silent anymore. It was spoken, validated, and approved. Ethan's face twisted into a mask of triumph. He strode around the table, grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like claws. "You heard him," he hissed, his wine-sour breath hot on my face. He began pulling me, stumbling, out of the dining room, past the perfectly decorated tree, towards the back door. "Get out of my house." He shoved the door open, and a blast of frigid December air hit me. He pushed me hard, and I stumbled out onto the concrete patio, my bare feet landing on the searing cold of the snow-dusted ground. The door slammed shut behind me, the lock clicking with a heavy final sound. I stood there, trembling, not from the cold, but from the shockwave of betrayal. Through the glass of the door, I could see the warm, golden light of the dining room. I saw my mother's voice, a faint, panicked sound coming through the wood. "Collins, stop making a scene. You're embarrassing your father." Embarrassing him. That was it. My pain, my humiliation, it was all just an embarrassment to them. The cold from the concrete seeped into my bones, but it wasn't as cold as the realization that washed over me. The pain in my cheek began to fade, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a family argument. This was an expulsion, an enemy action. I didn't knock. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My training took over. You assess the situation. You identify the threat. You establish a new objective. I looked at the warm house, no longer a home, but an enemy compound. I turned my back to the golden light and walked barefoot into the darkness of the snow-covered yard. My mission had changed. I was no longer a daughter on leave. I was a soldier, abandoned behind enemy lines, and I was beginning my reconnaissance. The only place I could think to go was a Motel 6 off the interstate, its cheerful sign a harsh beacon in the snowy darkness. I paid for a room with the crumpled 20s I'd saved for last-minute Christmas gifts. The man behind the plexiglass partition barely glanced up from his small TV. To him, I was just another piece of late-night human wreckage, and he wasn't wrong. Room 114 smelled of stale smoke and sharp chemical cleaner. The carpet was a thin, worn-out brown, and the floral bedspread felt like sandpaper. It was the absolute opposite of the counterfeit warmth I'd just been ejected from. The plush carpets, soft lighting, and the scent of pine and turkey. That house was a lie. This room, in its stark, anonymous misery, felt like the truth. I dropped my keys on the flimsy nightstand and walked into the small bathroom. The fluorescent light hummed aggressively, casting an unforgiving glow. Leaning over the sink, my hands gripping the cold porcelain, I looked in the mirror. My cheek was already blooming with color, a mottled pattern of angry red and deep purple. A visible wound, proof of the battle. But as I stared at my reflection, I knew it wasn't the first injury I'd sustained in that house. It was just the first one that everyone could see. That physical bruise triggered a lifetime of invisible ones. The clearest of them all tasted like cheap vanilla ice cream and the sweat of a long Ohio summer. I was 14, and my entire summer had been dedicated to a single objective: a brand new Schwinn mountain bike. It was silver, sleek, with 21 speeds. To me, it wasn't just a bike, it was freedom. It was the ability to ride to the reservoir, explore the trails beyond our subdivision, and own something that was truly mine. I'd spent June, July, and August working at the local Dairy King, serving soft-serve cones in a hot polyester uniform. I saved every dollar, and by mid-August, the bike was mine. I had it for exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of pure freedom. Then one Saturday, I found its space in the garage empty. An hour later, my brother Ethan, 17 and radiating smug invincibility, strolled up the driveway, pushing it. The front tire was bent, the handlebars twisted. One of the brake lines snapped. Hot, furious tears sprang to my eyes. "What did you do?" I yelled. He shrugged. "Took it for a spin, hit a curb, no big deal." "No big deal? You took it without asking and you broke it." I stormed inside, my heart pounding with injustice, to present my case to Mom and Dad. My mother sighed, that long-suffering sound she made when I disturbed her peace. "Oh, Collins, come on," she said, not even looking. "It's just a bike. Your brother needed it to see his friends." Just a bike. The words were a casual erasure of my 3 months of hard work. My father's response was worse. He came out, glanced at the wrecked bike, then at his son. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and handed it to Ethan. "Be more careful next time, son," was all he said. No one ever apologized. No one offered to fix it. My summer of work, my symbol of freedom, was now just a broken thing in the corner of the garage, a monument to the fact that my effort meant nothing, while my brother's whims meant everything. That was the real bruise, the deep, internal ache of being told, without words, that you simply don't matter as much. The hum of the fluorescent light brought me back to the present. I touched my cheek. The girl who cried over the bicycle was gone. In her place was a woman with no tears left to spare. Emotion is a luxury a soldier in the field can't afford. It was time to switch from feeling to thinking. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed. I didn't cry. I did what I was trained to do. I compiled an after-action report in my head. I assessed the hostiles. Subject 1, Ethan, openly hostile, primary aggressor. Weakness, arrogance. Subject 2, Richard, covert commander, sanctioned the attack. Weakness, his reputation. Subject 3, Carol, provided emotional support to the opposition. Weakness, maintaining the illusion of a perfect family. My military training, the very thing they mocked, was now my greatest weapon. It was stripping the pain away, replacing it with cold strategy. I pulled out my phone, its screen unnaturally bright. I opened my banking app, my fingers moving with purpose. I scrolled back 2 full years. There it was. Transfer after transfer, labeled family support. I took a screenshot of every single one. Then I opened my laptop, connected to the motel's unsecured Wi-Fi, and created a new encrypted folder. I named it Operation Homecoming. This wasn't a wounded daughter seeking pity. This was an intelligence officer building a dossier on a hostile organization. Every screenshot was evidence, every memory, a data point in a long history of systemic imbalance. As I worked, a wave of profound loneliness washed over me. It was the crushing weight of knowing the people who were supposed to be my allies had been the enemy all along. And then I thought of him. My grandfather, a Marine who fought in Vietnam. He'd passed away 5 years ago, but his presence was still a force. I remembered the last time I saw him in the sterile quiet of the hospice center. He was frail, a shadow of the strong man who taught me how to read a map. But his eyes were still sharp. He'd gripped my hand, his knuckles bony but his hold surprisingly firm. He'd pulled me closer, his voice a dry whisper. They don't see the heart of a warrior in you, Collins, he'd rasped, his eyes locking onto mine. But I do. Never surrender. Never surrender. It wasn't advice. It was an order. I stopped my work and reached into my duffel bag, my fingers finding the familiar, cool weight of the old brass compass he had given me. It was heavy in my palm, the lid worn smooth from his years of service. It had been his guide through jungles and firefights. Now, it was mine. I held it in the dim motel room, the needle quivering slightly before settling north. My mission was no longer about proving my worth to a family that would never see it. It wasn't about money or even revenge. It was about honoring his promise. I was fighting for the little girl whose summer was stolen, and for the soldier her grandfather always knew she would become. The objective was clear. The battle had just begun. The motel room was a temporary shelter, but it wasn't a command post. An operation of this magnitude required resources I didn't have: a reliable internet connection, a printer, and anonymity. The next morning, I checked out of the Motel 6 and drove to the one place that offered all three, the Westerville Public Library. It was a quiet, unassuming brick building, a sanctuary of suburban peace. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of old paper and floor polish. People were scattered around at the large oak tables, a college kid cramming for finals, a young mom reading a picture book to her toddler, an elderly man asleep behind a newspaper. They were all here seeking knowledge, or quiet, or escape. I was here to prepare for war. I found an empty computer terminal in a secluded corner, its back to the rest of the room. This little carrel would be my forward operating base. I logged in as a guest, the cheap plastic keyboard clacking under my fingers. My objective for the day was simple: transform 2 years of vague, painful memories into a concrete, undeniable arsenal of facts. In the military, this phase is called mission prep. It's the tedious, unglamorous work of gathering intelligence, assessing resources, and building a logistical foundation before you ever set foot on the battlefield. I started with the digital paper trail: email archives, online banking statements, utility payment histories. For hours, I sat there, methodically sifting through the digital debris of my life. Each document I found was another round of ammunition. I fed quarters into the slot on the public printer, each coin landing with a metallic clink. The machine whirred to life, spitting out pages that I quickly collected and tucked into a folder. 25 cents for a bank statement showing my monthly transfers. 50 cents for an email chain confirming my payment for the family's internet bill. $1 for the receipt from the plumber who fixed their garbage disposal. I was literally paying, once again, to prove my own existence. The work was draining. Each printed page was a fresh wave of bitterness. I found the invoice for the new water heater from last winter. I remembered the phone call vividly, my mother's voice, tight with theatrical panic, telling me the pilot light was out again and the water was ice cold. I'd been on a training exercise in the Mojave Desert, but I stopped what I was doing, got a satellite signal, and paid the emergency installation fee of over $1,000 with my savings. I remembered feeling a small glow of pride, being the responsible one, the one who could solve problems from halfway around the world. But looking at the invoice now, the customer line read a single name: Richard Spears. My contribution hadn't just been forgotten, it had been erased, my sacrifice claimed by my father as his own. The most damning piece of evidence came late in the afternoon. I remembered a conversation about a leak in the roof over the sunroom. I searched my sent emails from a year and a half ago. There it was, an email to my father. "Dad, Mom sounds really worried about that leak. If you guys are short, I can cover the repair cost. Just let me know." His reply was brief: "We'll manage. Things are tight right now. Thanks for the offer." Things are tight. I cross-referenced the date of that email with my father's credit card statements, which I still had access to from a time I'd helped him set up his online account. And there it was. On the exact same day he'd claimed they couldn't afford a roof repair, there was a charge for $2,800. The vendor was the Golfer's Pro Shop. It was for a new set of custom-fitted clubs for Ethan. I stared at the two pieces of paper side by side on the library table. The lie was so blatant, so insulting. A leaky roof that could cause thousands in water damage was ignored, while my brother's hobby was funded without a second thought. My offer of help, my genuine concern, had been brushed aside to maintain the fiction that they were in control, all while they funneled resources to their favored son. Throughout the day, my phone, set to vibrate, buzzed incessantly on the table beside me. It was like incoming artillery, designed to disrupt my focus. A series of texts from my mother, each one a masterclass in psychological warfare. "Collins, where are you? We're all so worried. Your father is very upset. This isn't like you." And the final guilt-laced blow: "You are tearing this family apart by being so dramatic." Then came the calls from my father. He never left a message. He just let it ring and ring, a silent, looming demand for me to answer, to submit. These were reconnaissance probes from the enemy, attempts to gauge my position and my resolve. I initiated radio silence. I didn't respond. I didn't decline the calls. I let them buzz, each vibration a confirmation that my absence was having an effect. I was no longer a predictable asset. I was an unknown variable, and it was making them nervous. By the time the librarian announced the library would be closing in 15 minutes, I had a stack of documents nearly 2 inches thick. I sat at the empty table, the soft overhead lights casting a warm glow on the silent room. I began to organize the papers, my hands moving with the precision of a clerk inventorying a supply depot. I created cover sheets with bold, block letters. Section 1. Housing support, mortgage contributions. Section 2. Utility payments, electric, water, internet. Section 3. Maintenance and repair, plumbing, HVAC, appliances. Section 4. Unreimbursed personal loans. Ethan Spears. I looked at the finished stack, neatly clipped together. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal anymore. That emotion had been burned away by the cold, methodical process of gathering facts. Instead, I felt a strange, cold sense of pride. This wasn't the diary of a hurt little girl. This was the ledger of a quartermaster, the logistical officer responsible for keeping an entire unit operational. For years, I had supplied this family, maintained their base, and ensured their comfort, all without recognition. This stack of papers was my report. It was the proof of my service. It was the long overdue accounting of their debt. I packed the file carefully into my backpack. My arsenal was built. The ammunition was counted. The next phase was to draft the terms of surrender. I left the library as the streetlights began to cast a golden glow on the freshly fallen snow. My backpack felt heavy with the weight of my newly assembled arsenal, but my body felt hollow, drained by the hours of methodical, soul-crushing work. The cold Ohio air bit at my face, a stark reminder that I had a folder full of evidence but nowhere to go. I hadn't eaten a real meal since that disastrous Christmas dinner, and the gnawing hunger was becoming a dull, persistent ache. I drove aimlessly for a few blocks until a small, warm light cut through the evening gloom. It was an old-fashioned American diner, the kind with a long formica counter and red vinyl stools. Miller's Place, the neon sign read, buzzing softly in the quiet street. It looked like the kind of place that had been there forever. I parked, my stomach clenching with a mix of hunger and anxiety as I counted the few dollars I had left. It was enough for coffee, maybe a piece of toast. That would have to do. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting smells of brewing coffee and frying bacon. It was quiet, the post-dinner lull. A woman who looked to be in her early 60s stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a damp cloth. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a gentle, welcoming smile. This had to be Mrs. Miller. "Just one?" she asked, her voice warm. I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Just a black coffee and a side of toast, please." She poured the coffee into a thick ceramic mug and set it in front of me. As I wrapped my cold hands around it, she seemed to study my face for a moment, her gaze lingering on the bruise on my cheek. I saw a flicker of concern in her eyes, but she didn't say anything about it. Instead, she just nodded and turned toward the kitchen. A few minutes later, she came back, not with toast, but with a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup, thick with vegetables and large pieces of shredded chicken. She set it down in front of me. "It's cold out there," she said simply. You look like you could use something to warm you up. On the house. I was stunned. I opened my mouth to protest, to say I couldn't pay for it, but the genuine kindness in her eyes stopped me. My own mother had watched me get hit and then worried about a gravy stain on her tablecloth. This perfect stranger was offering me food, offering me warmth, with no questions asked. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my voice thick. I ate the soup slowly, each spoonful a small act of healing. It was simple, honest food, and it tasted more like home than anything I'd eaten in years. Mrs. Miller stayed nearby, refilling my coffee, moving with a quiet efficiency. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. When I was done, she came over and leaned against the counter. "Tough day?" she asked gently. My armor, the rigid discipline I'd wrapped around myself for days, finally started to crack. I didn't give her the details. I couldn't. But I heard myself say, "You could say that. Some trouble with my family." She just nodded, her expression full of an understanding that went beyond words. She didn't press for more. Instead, she started talking about her own son. "My boy David, he's in the army, stationed in Afghanistan right now," she said, her eyes looking at a framed photo behind the counter. "He always says he misses the simple things the most. A hot meal he didn't have to eat out of a packet." She looked back at me. "You soldiers, you're all so strong. But a heart still needs to be kept warm." Her words hit me harder than the slap from my brother. She saw me, not as a problem, not as a burden, but as a soldier, and as someone with a heart that needed tending to. When I went to pay for the coffee, she just waved her hand. I insisted, placing my few dollars on the counter, but she pushed them back. Tucked under the saucer of my coffee cup was the bill. Scrawled across it in neat cursive was a note. It said, "Thank you for your service, both at home and abroad." I read it twice, the words blurring through the tears that suddenly filled my eyes. Both at home and abroad. She knew. Somehow this kind woman understood that I was fighting a war on two fronts. I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled my knees. As I turned to leave, my voice choked with gratitude, she stopped me. "Hold on a minute, dear," she said. "I'm in a bit of a bind. I need someone to help with closing and clean up for a few weeks. It's not much, but it pays." She paused, then added, "And there's a small, clean room upstairs above the diner. It's not being used. You could stay there, work off the rent. No pressure, just an offer." It wasn't just an offer of a job or a room. It was an offer of sanctuary, of trust. It was an act of faith from a complete stranger when my own family had shown me none. I remembered something I'd once read from the author Brené Brown. Belonging is not fitting in. It's the courage to stand alone and to let ourselves be seen. In that moment, standing in that diner, I felt seen. I'd like that very much," I said. "Thank you." That night, instead of a cold, impersonal motel room, I was in a small, cozy bedroom that smelled faintly of cinnamon and baked bread. The bed was covered with a thick, handmade quilt. Mrs. Miller brought me a soft wool blanket and a glass of hot milk, just as my grandfather used to. As I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the blanket, I finally cried. They weren't tears of self-pity or anger like the ones I had swallowed for days. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. A bowl of soup and a warm bed from a stranger had shown me more love than my own family had in 26 years. It makes you realize that sometimes the person who truly saves you isn't family at all. If you have a Mrs. Miller in your life, someone who showed you kindness when you needed it most, please hit the like button to honor them. And in the comments, I'd love to know, what is the one food that tastes like comfort to you? For me now, it will always be chicken noodle soup. I realized then that a soldier can't win a war alone. They need a safe rear base to fall back to, a place to rest and resupply. And in the unlikeliest of places, I had just found mine. The first week at Miller's place was a period of ceasefire. For the first time in my adult life, I experienced a quiet, uncomplicated peace. My days fell into a simple, grounding rhythm. I'd wake up early, help Mrs. Miller with the morning prep, work the lunch rush, and then spend the afternoons in my small, warm room, continuing my research or just reading a book borrowed from the library. There were no mind games, no hidden agendas, no walking on eggshells. There was just the gentle clatter of plates, the smell of coffee, and the quiet, unconditional acceptance from a woman who owed me nothing. I was beginning to feel, for the first time, what it might be like to have a safe home. But a soldier knows that a week of silence on the battlefield doesn't mean the war is over. It means the enemy is regrouping. The first volley of the counteroffensive came exactly 1 week after I'd left. It was a phone call from my mother. I was wiping down the counter after the lunch rush when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and my stomach instantly tightened. I let it go to voicemail, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. I remembered the words of Jocko Willink, a retired Navy SEAL whose books we had to read at officer candidate school. Discipline equals freedom. Right now, emotional discipline was the only thing that would keep me free from their drama. A minute later, a new voicemail icon appeared. I listened to it in the stockroom, leaning against a sack of potatoes. Her voice was thick with manufactured tears. "Collins, it's Mom. I just don't understand why you're doing this to us." A dramatic pause. "I worked so hard on Christmas dinner, and you just ruined it. You ruined everything." There was no mention of the slap, no mention of Ethan's words, or my father's complicity, or being thrown out into the snow. In her revision of history, I was the aggressor, and my crime was ruining her perfect holiday. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Ignore the real issue and focus on the perpetrator's hurt feelings. I deleted the voicemail. The attacks continued for days. Another call from my mother, this time her voice sharp with suburban anxiety. "Collins, you need to come home. The neighbors are starting to ask questions. You're embarrassing the entire family." My existence wasn't a matter of her concern, only a matter of public perception. My pain was an inconvenience to her image. Then my father tried a different tactic. A text message appeared on my phone one afternoon. It was a notification from my banking app. "Richard Spears has sent you $500,000. A moment later, a text from him followed. "I know you're upset, but come home so we can talk this out. Consider this a late Christmas present." I stared at the screen, a cold fury rising in me. This was so much worse than my mother's fake tears. This was a bribe. A blatant, insulting attempt to purchase my silence and compliance for $500. He thought he could put a price tag on my dignity, on the humiliation I'd endured. He saw it as a transaction, just like Ethan had called my financial support rent. To them, family wasn't about love or respect. It was a business, and I was just an asset that had gone rogue. I left the notification untouched. The money sat in my account, a testament to his guilt and a symbol of my refusal to be bought. My silence was my only weapon, and it was clearly effective. I was a black hole where a compliant daughter used to be. My refusal to engage, to argue, to even respond, was creating a vacuum that they didn't know how to fill. Their old tactics weren't working, and it was driving them into a panic. The proof of that panic arrived on a snowy Tuesday morning. A UPS truck pulled up outside the diner, and the driver came in carrying a medium-sized cardboard box. He read the label. "Package for Collins Spears." Mrs. Miller and I exchanged a look. I never got packages here. My heart began to beat a low, heavy drum against my ribs. I signed for it, my hand unsteady. The return address was my parents' house, and the handwriting, scrawled hastily across the label, was my father's. It was shaky, almost illegible, the writing of a man in a desperate hurry. "Everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Miller asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm not sure," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They seem scared of something." I took the box up to my room, my mind racing. What could possibly be in here? A sentimental gift meant to lure me back? More guilt-tripping letters? I sat on my bed and stared at it. This felt different. This felt like a mistake. My radio silence had forced them to make a move, and I had a terrible feeling my father had just made a fatal one. With trembling fingers, I tore open the cardboard flaps. Inside, there was no peace offering, No family photos or cherished heirlooms. It was a disorganized, chaotic mess of papers. Financial documents, property deeds, old tax returns, business agreements filled with legal jargon I didn't understand. It looked like someone had emptied a filing cabinet into a box in a blind panic. Tucked into the middle of the pile was a single, handwritten note on a piece of my father's personal stationery. The note that changed everything. It read, "Collins, your mother and I made a mistake. Ethan knows nothing about any of this. Please don't do anything. Just call me, please." I read the note 3 times. The words scrambled in my brain, then slowly rearranged themselves into a terrifyingly clear picture. Ethan knows nothing about any of this. He was trying to protect my brother. Please don't do anything. He was afraid of what I might do, what I might have already found out. He thought my silence was a threat, that I was building a case, and in his terror, he had just confirmed it. I slowly pulled the documents from the box, spreading them across my bed. Land transfer documents with suspicious signatures, tax filings that seemed to show far less income than I knew my father made, partnership agreements with shell corporations I'd never heard of. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about a family argument over money or respect anymore. This wasn't about a son being favored over a daughter. This was a conspiracy. My family wasn't just broken, it was corrupt. And my father, the man who had called me filth, the man who had tried to buy my silence for a pittance, had just made the biggest mistake of his life. In a desperate attempt to protect his kingdom, he had just mailed the enemy the blueprints to the entire fortress. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my small room, the documents spread around me like the aftermath of an explosion. The shock from my father's note had subsided, replaced by something colder, sharper. The lingering sadness I'd felt, the grief for a family I wished I had, was gone. In its place was the chilling clarity of a soldier staring at a map of enemy territory. In basic training, they teach you about the fog of war, the uncertainty that clouds a battlefield. That box of papers was a sudden, strong wind that blew the fog away, revealing the enemy's exact position. With a methodical calm that scared even me, I began to piece it all together. I was no longer a daughter looking at family finances. I was an intelligence analyst assembling a mosaic of corruption. The pattern emerged from the chaos. My father's financial consulting firm, Spears and Associates, wasn't just advising clients. It was a laundry machine. The convoluted business agreements, the transfers between shell corporations, it was a clear system for washing illicit cash for certain high-value clients. And Ethan, the golden boy project manager, was moving the pieces, his name on documents he clearly didn't understand. But the most sickening part of the entire conspiracy was discovering my own unwilling role in it. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the horror of it stole the air from my lungs. My monthly family support payments. I'd always imagined them going toward the mortgage, groceries, the mundane costs of running a household. The truth was infinitely more sinister. My money, earned through military discipline and sacrifice, was the seed money. It was clean, legitimate income from a federal employee, deposited into a joint account. It was used as a smokescreen, withdrawn in cash to help legitimize the dirty money. My service, my stable income, my unimpeachable record as a U.S. Army sergeant, it was all a shield. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my honor, the very core of my identity, and used it as camouflage for their crimes. The betrayal was so profound it left me dizzy. And then I found it. The final, unforgivable violation. It was a loan application for a small business filed 2 years ago. The business was a shell corporation I'd never heard of. The amount was for $50,000. And in the applicant section, in my father's neat handwriting, were my name, my date of birth, and my social security number. He had stolen my identity, forging my signature to make me an unwitting accomplice in his fraud. I was a ghost in his machine, a name on a paper that could tie me to a federal crime. The rage that followed was white-hot and silent, burning away all doubt. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a betrayal of my country and my code. Just then, my phone began to buzz. And it didn't stop. It was a relentless, desperate barrage. A full-on artillery assault from a terrified commander. I watched the screen, a morbid curiosity taking hold. One call, 5, 20. In the space of an hour, 43 missed calls from my father. He finally left a voicemail. I pressed play and put the phone on speaker, listening to his voice fill the quiet room. It wasn't the voice of an angry father. It was the thin, trembling plea of a cornered criminal. Collins, please, pick up the phone, he stammered, his breath ragged. You don't understand what you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built. Your mother. God, Collins, she won't survive this. Please, just call me. I listened to the message twice. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. He was using my mother as a human shield, another classic tactic. I deleted the message and blocked his number. The time for communication was over. The next morning, I stood in front of the small bathroom mirror. The bruise on my cheek had faded to an almost invisible yellow shadow. But I wasn't looking at the bruise. I was looking at the woman in the reflection. Her eyes were different. The hurt was gone. The confusion was gone. They were clear, hard, and focused. There were no more tears left to cry. There was only the mission. I remembered Ethan's voice, full of arrogant rage, snarling, "Get out of my house." I looked at my own reflection and whispered the words that had been forming in my soul all night. That was never my house. It was an enemy's forward operating base. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. And today, the counteroffensive begins. I had been fighting for their approval, for their recognition, for a scrap of love. I was done. What do you do when the people you swore to love betray you in the deepest way imaginable? You change the terms of engagement. There comes a moment when silence is no longer an option. When you have to stand up and fight back, not for revenge, but for justice. If you've ever reached that breaking point, hit the like button for every person who has found their voice. And if you stand with me on this mission, comment with a single word: justice. My fight was no longer about being seen as a daughter. It was about acting as a soldier. And a soldier's duty is to expose the enemy, no matter who they are. The vow I made in the mirror wasn't emotional. It was operational. With the enemy identified and their conspiracy decoded, the mission transitioned from intelligence gathering to strategic engagement. Sun Tzu's The Art of War teaches that you must know your enemy and know yourself to win. I knew them now, down to their bones. Their weaknesses were greed and a desperate fear of public exposure. And I knew myself. I was a sergeant in the United States Army. I was trained in discipline, strategy, and the unflinching execution of a plan. Emotion was a liability. Action was the objective. My first move was to secure a tactical asset. I knew I couldn't navigate the legal minefield alone. Digging through my memory, I recalled a name: Arthur Vance. He was the father of a guy in my unit, a tough-as-nails tax attorney out of Cleveland with a reputation for being a bulldog. I found his firm's number online and made the call from the diner's back office, Mrs. Miller having given me the space with a quiet, trusting nod. When his secretary put me through, I didn't present myself as a distraught young woman. I was a soldier reporting a situation. "Mr. Vance, my name is Sergeant Collins Spears," I began, my voice steady and formal. "I'm currently on leave. I have acquired documented proof of significant financial fraud, including money laundering and identity theft. I require consultation on the proper procedure for reporting this to the Internal Revenue Service." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him shifting from a civilian mindset to something more focused. My professional, no-nonsense approach had cut through the usual noise. "Sergeant," he said, his voice a low gravel, "tell me everything." I did. I laid out the facts concisely, without emotion, just as I would in a briefing. He listened without interruption, only asking sharp, clarifying questions. By the end of the call, I had my legal framework. My next step was to package the intelligence. Back in my room, I spent the afternoon on my laptop, organizing the evidence into 2 distinct digital dossiers. The first I labeled Package Alpha. It contained every financial transaction, every email, every receipt proving my contributions to the family. It was the story of my sacrifice, quantified and undeniable. The second, more volatile dossier was Package Bravo. This held the contents of my father's panic-sent package, the fraudulent tax filings, the shady transfer documents, the forged business loan in my name. This wasn't a story of sacrifice, it was a portfolio of federal crimes. With the packages prepared, I drafted the declaration of war. It was a short, cold email addressed to Richard, Carol, and Ethan Spears. I used a secure, encrypted email service I'd learned about in a cybersecurity training, one that would make the origin difficult to trace immediately. The subject line was clinical. Preliminary report, response required within 24 hours. The body of the email was not a plea. It was not a request. It was a list of demands, a set of terms for their unconditional surrender. I wrote, "This communication serves as a formal notice. The attached file, Package Alpha, contains a detailed summary of my financial contributions to the Spears household from the past 2 years. In light of recent events and discoveries, the following actions are required. 1. A formal written apology from Ethan Spears for the physical assault committed on Christmas Eve to be delivered to my legal counsel. 2. Full reimbursement of all funds detailed in Package Alpha, calculated with a standard rate of interest, to be transferred within 48 hours. 3. A. Complete and transparent written explanation for the financial activities documented in a secondary file, which is currently held in reserve. The deadline for your full compliance is 17 hours tomorrow. I attached Package Alpha. Package Bravo, my ace in the hole, remained unmentioned but heavily implied. They wouldn't know exactly what I had, only that I had something damning. Let their guilty consciences fill in the blanks. I hit send. The first shot was fired. But a good soldier always has a contingency plan. The final step of my strategy was the most ruthless, a fail-safe to ensure there was no escape. I composed a second email. The recipients were Arthur Vance in Cleveland and the public intake email address for the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. The message was brief. To whom it may concern, please find attached evidence of suspected financial crimes for your review. Regards, a concerned citizen. I attached Package Bravo, the complete, unredacted file of their entire criminal enterprise. Then I used a scheduling tool, setting the email to be sent automatically in exactly 48 hours. It was my dead man switch, my tactical nuke. They had a 2-day window to meet my demands. If they complied, I could consider canceling the scheduled email. If they refused, hesitated, or tried to threaten me, the system would launch the strike for me. The fuse was lit. I clicked Schedule Send. A profound cold calm washed over me. I'd done everything I could. I'd analyzed the intelligence, secured my assets, issued my terms, and set the consequences. The power was no longer in their hands. It wasn't in Ethan's fists, or my mother's manipulative tears, or my father's web of lies. It was in a server, miles away, counting down the seconds. The battle was now theirs to lose. All I had to do was wait for the enemy's response. I didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour after my email was sent, the enemy launched its predictable, desperate counterattack. It started with a sound that wasn't a knock. It was a frantic, percussive banging on the front door of the diner, loud enough to rattle the glass. Mrs. Miller, who was closing out the cash register, looked up at me with wide, worried eyes. I gave her a slow, steady nod. I've got this. I had anticipated this incursion. I was ready for it. I walked down the short hallway from the kitchen and unlocked the door. Ethan stood on the doorstep, his face a mask of fury, snowflakes melting in his hair. He looked past me, into the warm, empty diner, as if he had the right to storm it. "We need to talk," he snarled, trying to push past me. I didn't move. I stood my ground, my body calm, my presence a solid wall. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You need to listen." The shift in power was immediate and absolute. He stopped, momentarily confused by my lack of fear. I stepped back and gestured for him to come inside, not to the warmth of a family home, but to a neutral, sterile environment. My territory, now. He strode into the middle of the empty dining room, looking wildly out of place amongst the red vinyl booths. Mrs. Miller remained behind the counter, a silent, steady sentinel. She didn't say a word, but her presence was a fortress at my back. Ethan started his assault using his oldest and most familiar weapon: intimidation. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" he spat, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "You're not just angry, you're insane. You're going to destroy this family." I just stood there, my hands clasped loosely behind my back, and met his gaze. My silence was a shield his anger couldn't penetrate. It unnerved him. His strategy shifted. He tried bribery. "Look," he said, forcing a placating tone that sounded grotesque. "Okay, I'm sorry. I was angry on Christmas. I went too far." He took a step closer. "How much do you want? Just name a price. How much money will it take to make all of this just go away?" I didn't even blink. He still thought it was about money. He still thought he could buy my silence, buy my dignity back for me. My continued silence made his desperation grow, and he reverted to his final, most trusted weapon: contempt. His face twisted back into a sneer. "You know what? It doesn't matter. You're nothing without us. You get that, don't you? You go off and play soldier, but you'll always come crawling back because you have nothing. You are nothing without this family." And that was it. That was the final insult. The core lie they had built my life upon. He had just confirmed the entire premise of my mission. I gave him a small, cold smile. I slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. He watched, confused, as my thumb moved across the screen. I held his gaze, a predator that was done playing with its food. "You just said the wrong password," I said, my voice barely a whisper. His brows furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" In front of his very eyes, I opened the scheduled email. The one containing Package Bravo. The one addressed to the IRS. And with a slow, deliberate motion, I pressed the button that said, "Send now." He flinched as if he'd heard a gunshot. "What was that? What did you just do?" he stammered, a note of real panic creeping into his voice. "That," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket, my voice as cold and clear as ice, "was Package Bravo. A complete digital copy of Dad's creative accounting, including the loan he took out in my name. It has just been delivered to the Internal Revenue Service." I took a small step forward. Mission complete. The transformation of his face was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. It was a rapid, violent cascade of emotions. The arrogant fury dissolved first, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. Disbelief gave way to a dawning, sickening comprehension. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. His eyes, which had been burning with rage just moments before, were now wide with pure primal terror. It was in that moment that his programming, his entire life of entitled privilege, took over. When threatened, he reacted with force. He let out an inarticulate roar and lunged at me, his hands reaching for me. It was almost laughably slow. All my years of training, of hand-to-hand combat drills, took over. I didn't block. I didn't strike back. I simply shifted my weight, took one precise step to my left, and let his momentum carry him past me. His forward charge met empty air. He stumbled, arms flailing, and crashed into an empty table with a loud clatter of metal and formica. He went down hard, sprawling onto the checkered linoleum floor. My discipline, my calm, had utterly neutralized his brute force. He pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, breathing in ragged, panicked gasps. He looked up at me from the floor, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as a brother, not as a tormentor, but as exactly what he was: a weak, terrified boy. "Why?" he whispered, the single word a pathetic, broken sound. I stood over him, not with anger, not with pity, but with the detached finality of a soldier whose battle was won. I remembered my oath to protect against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes the enemy is in your own home. Because a soldier never negotiates with the enemy, I said. They only accept an unconditional surrender. Then I turned my back on him and walked away, the sound of his ragged breathing swallowed by the profound, victorious silence of the room. After Ethan scrambled out of the diner, a profound silence descended, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. The adrenaline that had coursed through my veins drained away, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Mrs. Miller quietly came out from behind the counter, a dish towel in her hands. She didn't ask what had happened, she just placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Come on, dear," she said softly. "Let's get you upstairs. You look like you've been through a war." She was right. The battle was over. Now came the damage assessment. The news of the fallout came in fragments over the next few days, delivered in the calm, professional tone of my lawyer, Arthur Vance. He spoke in terms of legal consequences, not family drama. The IRS, he informed me, had officially opened a criminal investigation into Spears and Associates. My father's personal and business bank accounts had been frozen. Ethan had been fired from his project manager position by the firm's partners, who were scrambling to distance themselves from the impending legal firestorm. The house, our perfect suburban castle in Westerville, was facing an asset seizure lien, as it had been purchased and maintained with laundered funds. The Spears empire, built on a foundation of deceit, was crumbling under the weight of the truth, just as I had planned. But as Mr. Vance relayed each piece of news, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of victory I'd expected. There was no joy, no satisfying surge of vengeance. There was only a heavy, hollow emptiness in the pit of my stomach. The objective had been achieved. Mission accomplished. But it felt less like a victory parade and more like surveying a battlefield after the fighting had stopped. A week after the showdown, my father called. It came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but some final, lingering impulse made me press the button. The voice on the other end was almost unrecognizable. The commanding, confident tone of Richard Spears was gone, replaced by the broken, defeated rasp of an old man. "You took everything," he said. There was no anger, no pleading, just a flat statement of fact. For the first time, I decided to engage. My voice was as calm and even as his was broken. "I didn't take anything," I replied, the words coming easily, truthfully. "I just gave back what was never yours to begin with. Your mistake was confusing my silence for complicity. That was your tactical error, not mine." I could hear him take a shaky breath, perhaps to argue, perhaps to beg. I didn't wait to find out. I ended the call. There was nothing left to say. That night, after my shift, I sat in my small, quiet room above the diner. The scent of cinnamon still lingered in the air. I pulled my worn leather wallet from my bag and took out the few folded, creased photographs I always carried with me. One was of my grandfather in his marine dress blues. The other was of a 10-year-old me, grinning a gap-toothed smile, my arm slung around a teenage Ethan at the Ohio State Fair. We were holding a giant stuffed animal he'd won for me. His smile, in that photo, was genuine. For one brief, sunny afternoon, he had been my big brother. I stared at the photo for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. All I felt was a deep, profound sadness for the two kids in that picture, for the family that could have been, but never was. I didn't tear it up. Tearing it up would be an act of passion, and the passion was gone. Instead, I opened an old wooden box where I kept my service medals and my grandfather's compass. I carefully placed the photo of me and Ethan inside, alongside the picture of my grandfather. I was archiving the past, not erasing it, but putting it where it belonged, in a closed container. As I was closing the lid, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from my mother. It was the final, predictable volley from a defeated enemy. It wasn't an apology. It was a final attempt to wound, a last-ditch effort to shift the blame. It read, "I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed everything." I read the words, and for the first time, I felt not anger, not sadness, but a distant clinical pity for her. She was still in the dark, still protecting the lie. I typed back a single, short reply, a final report to close out the operation. I didn't destroy it, I just turned on the lights. I sent the message, and then I began the final protocol. In the Army, you learn about establishing a demilitarized zone, a DMZ. It's a buffer area where hostilities are forbidden, A space designed not to fix a conflict, but to simply end it. It was time to create my own DMZ. I opened my contacts. I found my father's name, held my finger on the screen, and selected block this caller. Then I did the same for my mother, and finally, for Ethan. It wasn't an act of rage. It was a conscious, strategic decision made with a clear head. It was a logistical move to secure my own peace. After they were blocked, I went one step further. I deleted their contact entries entirely. Their names vanished from my phone. A soldier knows when to retreat from an unwinnable battlefield to preserve their own strength. This was me, officially declaring a ceasefire. Not for them. For me. The war was finally over. I had survived, 1 year later. The scene is Miller's place on a crisp autumn evening. The air outside carries the scent of burning leaves, but inside it's all warmth and the familiar, comforting aroma of coffee and grilled onions. I'm behind the counter, wiping it down, a familiar rhythm to my movements. The Friday night dinner rush has just ended. A few regulars linger at their tables, finishing their pie, and I share easy smiles with them. They know me now. I'm not the haunted girl who stumbled in out of the snow. I'm Collins, the diner's manager. I don't wear a uniform anymore, not the army greens I wore with so much pride and pain. Tonight, it's just a simple apron over a flannel shirt and jeans. But I still stand tall. The military bearing is ingrained in me, but it's no longer a defensive posture. It's a quiet confidence that comes not from rank or training, but from a deep, settled sense of self. As I'm refilling the salt shakers, the day's mail catches my eye. In it is a thick, official-looking envelope from Arthur Vance's law firm. My heart doesn't pound with anxiety like it used to. I take it to the back office, sit down at the small desk, and open it. Inside is a final statement regarding the legal case against Richard Spears and a cashier's check. A court had ruled that a portion of the assets recovered from my father's crimes, specifically the funds directly tied to my identity theft, were to be awarded to me as restitution. I look at the number on the check. It's a substantial amount. A year ago, this money would have represented the sum of my pain, a bitter price for my stolen honor. Now, it feels different. It's not blood money. It's a tool. It's an opportunity. I already know exactly what I'm going to do with it. I pull out a piece of diner stationery and begin to write a letter to Mr. Vance. I instruct him to use the entirety of the funds to establish a new scholarship, the Sergeant Daniel Spears Legacy Fund, named for my grandfather. It would be a small fund, dedicated to helping the children of disabled veterans from Ohio pay for college or trade school. A slow smile spreads across my face as I write. The Spears family legacy, as my father had built it, was one of lies and greed. This would be my legacy. I would take the weapon they had formed against me and reforge it into a plowshare, planting seeds of hope for other families, other soldiers. Their name was a monument to deceit. My grandfather's name would become a monument to service. As if on cue, my phone rings with a FaceTime call. The screen lights up with a smiling face, tan and tired, set against a backdrop of desert sand. It's David, Mrs. Miller's son, calling from his base overseas. "Hey, Collins," he says, his voice crackling slightly. "Just wanted to check in. How's my mom?" "She's great, David, currently trying to perfect a new apple pie recipe. You're going to have to be the judge when you get home," I say, laughing. "I'm counting on it." "Hey, she told me what you did with the new online ordering system. Said business is up 20%. He shakes his head in admiration. "She calls you her guardian angel, you know." I feel a warmth spread through my chest that has nothing to do with the diner's heating. "No," I reply, the words feeling easy and true. "We're a team." We talk for a few more minutes, an easy conversation filled with mutual respect, the quiet understanding that passes between two people who wear, or have worn, the uniform. He tells me to stay safe. I tell him the same. It's a simple exchange, but it's everything I ever wanted from a brother. Camaraderie, respect, a shared sense of duty. After the call, I help Mrs. Miller finish closing up. We lock the front door, flip the neon sign to "closed," and head back to the warm, spacious kitchen that has become the heart of my world. The remnants of dinner service are all cleaned up, In the center of the big steel prep table are two place settings. Two steaming bowls of chicken noodle soup. We sit down, the two of us, in the comfortable silence of a long day's end. We don't need to talk much. We just eat. The soup is just as I remember it from that first night. Hot, savory, and full of a simple, honest goodness. It's the taste of sanctuary. I look across the table at this woman with kind, crinkled eyes who gave me a job, a home, and a place to belong when I had none. Mrs. Miller often quotes a line from the Bible. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you," she'd say. I used to think of peace as the absence of conflict. Now, I understand. It's not an absence, it's a presence. It's the feeling of safety, of purpose, of being valued. It's the quiet warmth of this kitchen on a Friday night. I am no longer Sergeant Collins Spears on leave from a war zone. I'm not the ghost in my family's machine. I'm just Collins. And for the first time in my entire life, I am truly, finally home. I have been honorably discharged from the longest war I ever fought and welcomed into a life I built myself. A life of peace. My war is finally over, and the greatest victory wasn't the revenge. It was the peace I found afterward. My journey taught me that true family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you have the courage to build for yourself, one small act of kindness at a time. If this story has touched you in any way, and if you believe in the power of creating your own dawn, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Every story like this that gets shared is a beacon of hope for someone else fighting their own silent war. Thank you for listening.